Good morning. I'm Margie O'Driscoll, and on behalf of the Center for Innovation's Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. We'd like to take a moment to express our gratitude to the many sponsors who make our work possible. We wouldn't be here today without your support. Thank you. We'd also like to extend a huge welcome to Canadian firm Unitech to our family of innovators. Before we begin today's webinar, I'd like to share with you some information about upcoming activities and events at CFI. On October 10th, here in San Francisco, CFI will host an in-person event at Architectural Resources Group's beautiful offices on Pier 9. I'll be interviewing Andrei Lochnikov, one of the leaders of the Ukrainian NGO Dobrobot. You may recall that in January of this year, CFI brought 10 Ukrainian architects, builders, and members of parliament to the Bay Area to see what we call advanced means and methods of construction. When the group returned to Ukraine, they undertook several projects, including a soon-to-be-announced design competition to redesign Irpin University. Andrei will describe the projects undertaken by Dobrobot following this trip, and will also share a little bit about life today in Ukraine. If you would like to attend, please email me via the CFI website. Finally, for many of us, this is the time of year to develop our 2025 budgets. If you're listening today, we know that you find value in CFI's work, so please help support our efforts to promote innovation in the AEC industry. Please sponsor CFI today. Please note that due to the wonders of modern technology, we are re-recording the beginning of this webinar. We had sound issues with the first recording and will cut to the original video midway so we can include the great Q&A from the audience at the end. So now I'd like to welcome you to a very interesting webinar. In the AEC industry, most of us hold the building codes as sacrosanct. But how building codes come to be and how we can work with the codes to inspire innovation is complicated at best. Today, we are honored to have Ryan Colker, the Vice President of Innovation at the International Code Council, join us to unpack the challenges and opportunities of innovation in relation to the building code. Ryan has a rich career in this technical area. While he now focuses on energy, resilience, and innovation, previously he was a vice president of the Congressionally-established National Institute of Building Sciences, and he was also the manager of government affairs at ASHRAE. Ryan's going to share a bit today about how the ICC works, how building codes are developed and changed, and how the building codes are adapting to new opportunities in AEC. Ryan, thanks for joining us again today.
Yeah, thanks, Margie, and really appreciate the opportunity to share some of the things that are happening in the code space, and particularly sort of the opportunities to help advance innovation in the built environment. Maybe I'll start with sort of where I started and how sort of I got into the building space in particular, which was really by accident. I had a seventh grade science teacher who sort of really inspired me to look at the environment broadly and think about some of the challenges we face. And so on the left there is sort of me trying to work with the local community to address some of the challenges around potentially building a new marina in a mangrove area. And so really sort of identifying the hazards of that potential sort of shift to where we are today. Really identifying opportunities and needs within sort of the built environment to help address a lot of the challenges that we face. And so that picture is actually from COP28 last year, where 28 countries and multiple different supporting organizations came together to declare the need for near zero energy and resilient buildings as the new normal by 2030. And so really proud of that sort of accomplishment and my ability to contribute to that work, but really recognizing that's just the start of where we need to be. So let me start maybe with a little bit more on sort of context relative to the International Code Council, who we are, what we do, and sort of how do we fit into this broader innovation conversation. So ICC is probably best known for the development of model building codes and standards, which really serve as the basis for the codes and standards that are adopted across the United States, but also increasingly internationally as well. But sort of thinking about the sort of entire ecosystem of regulatory processes, just having sort of the codes and standards themselves is not enough. So ICC really focuses on a lot of the tools and services that help sort of make those codes effective. So certainly things like personnel training and certification, product evaluation, which I'll talk a little bit about further on, accreditation services, working with jurisdictions on sort of their software tools and strategies around sort of the individual requirements, regulations, and those sorts of things. Community resilience benchmarks, sort of taking beyond sort of the building level to look at community level opportunities and needs around resilience. And then third-party evaluation services. We'll talk a little bit about that in the context of off-site construction as well. So, ICC, I mentioned building codes and standards. We really have a whole ecosystem of standards and codes that really address a wide variety of challenges that the building industry faces. So we have 15 model codes that really sort of run the gamut of all of the things that we really care about, relative to the built environment. So fire safety, plumbing safety, energy efficiency, wildland-urban interface codes, green construction codes, and really being able to sort of, through that suite of codes, address a lot of the challenges that we face, sort of as an industry and as a society. And so it's important to sort of talk a little bit about sort of the context of where building codes sit, within the U.S. So we have a very decentralized system where the codes and standards that are used for the built environment are adopted at the state and local level. So there's no national building code, no national body that's responsible for development or implementation of codes. And so ICC really fills sort of that need through the development of model building codes, really leveraging a public-private partnership, taking expertise and insight from across the industry, engaging public officials, the AEC community, manufacturers, users, and sort of that whole breadth of folks that participate in the code development process. And as I mentioned, the codes themselves are adopted at the state or local level. And we'll talk about some of the challenges and benefits of that approach, but then enforcement is really localized. And so, I'm sort of mentioning codes and standards in the same breath, but they serve maybe slightly different roles and are actually developed through slightly different processes. I'll focus more on sort of the code side because that's a little bit different than what folks may typically be used to if you've been involved in other standards development processes, whether that's through ASTM or ASHRAE or some other sort of bodies. The codes development process in particular really provides for consensus building and engagement from across the industry. So really, in each code update cycle, which runs every 3 years, we put a call out to anyone who's interested to identify, what are some of the key challenges that you have, with the current code? What are some things that maybe need to change moving forward? Where are the opportunities to embed innovation or new practices into the code? So we really make that call, that request for code change proposals. We compile all of those code change proposals and then hold committee action hearings. And so those are really opportunities for folks to debate the pros and cons of particular aspects of the code, why things should change, why things shouldn't change. And the committee in this context is actually a diverse committee of various different interest categories. So architects, engineers, contractors, code officials, manufacturing representatives, that really sort of identify or make recommendations on sort of how individual proposals should be dealt with. And so sort of after that code action hearing, there's an opportunity for folks to make an additional round of comments and bring things before the committee again. So maybe things aren't sort of quite right after that first round of committee action hearings. So there's an opportunity to sort of tweak, go back and forth, and sort of represent to that committee Committee, again, will sort of make recommendations on the path forward, provide another opportunity for broader consensus building, broader opportunities for folks to provide feedback. And then we hold a public comment hearing. And so these hearings, again, are open to anyone who's interested in participating, debate the pros and cons of particular changes. And then the code officials themselves are the ones that vote on sort of what gets contained in the next edition of the code, really focusing on the role of code officials as sort of protectors of their community with sort of no other interest than their community at heart. And so what comes out of that process is the next edition of the codes. And so hopefully through sort of that description, you really sort of get the perspective that the codes are developed through a very open and consensus-based process where participation is really encouraged from folks across the built environment. I think, probably a lot of folks think that, the codes are developed in this sort of secret black box environment with just a small group of folks in a room. But really, it's the building industry at large, representing sort of the diversity of stakeholders that really participate in the code development process. And, sort of what comes out of that is really a consensus-based approach. So really encourage everyone to be involved in the code development process itself. Standards process, on the other hand, is sort of more deliberative. We have committees that pull together sort of recommended content for standards, but again, hold several rounds of public comment opportunities for folks to weigh in, make recommendations, say why something could work better, or why an idea put forward by the committee is a stupid idea. So real opportunities for engagement there. So I mentioned sort of the decentralized nature of building codes across the US. This map really represents where the International Building Code is adopted. But across the 14 other codes that I mentioned, there are sort of similar maps and similar diversity of where states and localities are relative to which edition of the code that we're on. So you see the dark blue is states that are updated to the 2021 International Building Code, but we have places that are on the 2009 and even places that don't have a statewide adoption. And that really provides some level of complexity for architects, engineers, manufacturers, and others who are working in sort of multiple jurisdictions to really sort of know what code requirements are in place in each of those jurisdictions, and designing buildings and constructing buildings sort of appropriately to those codes and standards. I think it's also important to note that even within states that have, say, adopted the 2021 IBC, there's sort of wide variation in the exact content, of those codes in those states. So, each state goes through an amendment process and makes amendments, to the codes as part of their adoption process. So, really creates some complexity in the space. But I think the one sort of key benefit that we do see from sort of this diversity of approaches is there's real opportunity for innovation. So, states can test things out, see sort of what works, and be able to sort of bring lessons learned to the model code development process. So I think that's, one particular benefit that we may see, from sort of this decentralized approach. I'm going to then sort of from that context, dive into sort of 4 key areas that we see, both challenges for the building industry, but I think, society as a whole as well. So sustainability, affordability, workforce, and resilience. And those sort of guide a lot of my work and a lot of the work that the Code Council does day to day. So let me start with some of the solutions that we've developed to help really support the advancement of innovation within the building industry. And I think the important context here is that, as many of you probably know, the building industry is sort of a continuing sort of layering on of levels of complexity and completion. So, we start with raw materials, whether that's metals, concrete, plastic, wood, and sort of bring those together into products. So HVAC systems, plumbing systems, structural systems, electrical components. And then, sort of getting to sort of increasing layers of complexity at the systems level. So mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and all of those systems then come together sort of at the building level. So, individual buildings, whether that's an office building, a school, hospital, those sorts of things. And then, in many contexts, those buildings sit within a portfolio or a campus. And so really looking at sort of opportunities to advance innovation at multiple different scales and address, in some cases, very different audiences that sort of sit at each of those scales. And so being able to sort of think holistically, but also dive down into sort of the very specific needs that we may have in particular areas. So let me start maybe at let's call it the product level, and really sort of the challenges of getting new innovations to the marketplace. So folks may be familiar with this or sort of a similar tech to market process of sort of that continuum of how do sort of new ideas, new designs get to market, and where are some of the particular challenges. So I'm going to focus particularly on the commercialization valley of death. So sort of once you've proved out that a process is doable, how do you actually get that into the marketplace? And so when we talk about the building industry, there are sort of several folks that need to be convinced that a particular product or innovation actually works for them. Code officials, certainly a key audience, but the AEC community as well. And so we have some strategies where we can support manufacturers in getting these new technologies and new ideas to market within the building space. And one of those is actually through a requirement in the building code that really allows for sort of alternative methods for approvals. So, the building code may not sort of specifically identify, a particular technology or practice, but identifies an outcome. What are we hoping to achieve? Or if it does name a particular sort of technology, what are the sort of expectations of, how that technology should perform? And so we have a basis through an evaluation report to actually identify that a new product or new innovation actually meets the requirements of a standard or a code. And so, we do that through sort of reviewing the product against a code, a criteria, some sort of basis to assure that it's meeting the requirements that it needs to be acceptable, for use in buildings. And so, we go through a certification process to review the product, inspect the manufacturing facility, and then continuing to monitor to make sure that that product continues to deliver on those requirements. And so, sometimes if there is a standard for a product, we can certainly evaluate against that product. But in many cases, in the innovation space, there may not be a standard yet. This may be sort of the first instance of a particular strategy. And so we've developed sort of this thing called an acceptance criteria, which you can think of sort of as a pre-standard. So, with this new sort of material, what are the testing requirements? What is really required to provide some level of confidence that this new product meets the needs and addresses safety, sustainability, durability, structural performance, whatever the particular requirements are for that particular product. And so the acceptance criteria sort of lays that out and really provides that opportunity for manufacturers to test against those particular testing requirements that are provided. And so sort of once someone goes through those testing processes, they provide all of that sort of information back to the ICC evaluation service, and we produce an evaluation service report, which really lays out sort of all of the tests that have been conducted and sort of what those tests mean for that particular product. So where can that product be used? Maybe within the code, there are only sort of certain areas where there may be design requirements for wind load or seismic loads, for instance. And so the evaluation service report really outlines, how you can effectively use that product. And so, would certainly encourage folks to take a look at evaluation service reports as a mechanism to be able to get, new and innovative products to the marketplace. So here are just a couple of examples for sort of innovative or new and emerging products that have evaluation service reports. So CLT, or cross-laminated timber, is one where there are opportunities to evaluate effectiveness, to meet a particular requirement or particular standard. The other one in the top right is a sort of concrete void system, actually made from recycled plastic. So you get the benefit of recycling plus the benefit of reduced concrete requirements. And so, having an evaluation service report really helps to prove out that technology is effective. An emerging area with lots of interest is around 3D printing. So we have an acceptance criteria, which is actually now being used to validate the use of concrete printed structures. So I think that's certainly an example. And then in panelized systems, we have an acceptance criteria for sandwich panels. So things like structural insulated panels, which bring together a higher degree of finish than you would normally see, sort of on a job site. And so sort of maybe building off of, some of that context for new approaches to address and enhance delivery of solutions that address things like building quality, workforce challenges, sustainability, affordability, and job site safety. We really recognized offsite construction as a really great opportunity to address some of these challenges. And so, if we think about sort of speed to market and affordability, you can have the site work, the foundation work being done at the same time that you're actually constructing the bulk of the building in a factory. And so having this sort of parallel process instead of a linear process really brings sort of opportunities to the market. But also we see, things like sustainability, opportunities to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and waste associated, with construction, because we're doing it in a factory, can be much more deliberate, sort of about that process. And so we've really seen an uptake in interest in offsite construction, including from the White House. So this is part of sort of the housing plan to support and promote the use of modular, panelized, and manufactured systems to really address some of the housing affordability crisis. So really providing opportunities. And so, thinking about sort of the challenges, here's another map that sort of reflects how offsite construction is regulated across the US. So we have 39 states that regulate offsite construction at the state level. Of course, each of those states operate a little bit differently. Some only cover commercial buildings, some only cover residential buildings, some include panels or panelized systems, some don't. Some allow third-party plan review, some allow third-party inspection, some allow both, some allow neither. And so if you think about sort of the opportunities that offsite construction provides to provide a sort of a regional basis for addressing needs within the industry, sort of that complexity creates challenges for folks that have invested in manufacturing facilities. And so, ICC has really identified an opportunity to help support standardization and regulatory consistency across the country. And we'll talk about ICC MBI standards 1200 and 1205 as the basis to be able to do that in a second. I'll also particularly point to sort of the yellowish orange states where there actually is no statewide program to support offsite construction. And so if you're wanting to do an offsite construction project in those states, you have to go to each individual jurisdiction, make the case, set up the processes. And so that really creates some inefficiencies, some disincentives actually to use offsite construction in those states. But I'm pleased to report that earlier this year, Utah actually is establishing a statewide program. So that's a huge opportunity. based off of ICC MBI standards 1200 and 1205. We've seen the Commonwealth of Virginia adopt those standards as well. Montana has actually just adopted the standards as well. And then U.S. General Services Administration and others are really looking to the standards to help provide some consistency. And so here's just some of the sort of work that we're doing in this space relative to offsite construction. I'll dive a little bit more into some of the sort of individual processes, but really ICC MBI standards 1200 and 1205 work together to provide a coordinated basis to support the validation and verification that offsite construction is meeting the same requirements as site-built relative to building code requirements. Important to note that offsite construction still needs to meet the same requirements of site-built, but since everything's happening in a factory, which could be hundreds or even thousands of miles away from the job site, you really need a very different type of approvals process. So Standard 1200 really covers sort of what are the requirements for architects, engineers, manufacturers, general contractors to sort of be able to validate what's in the plans, what's happening in the factory is actually meeting those code requirements. And then Standard 1205 really provides sort of the flip side of that. So what are the requirements for inspection, plan review, and regulatory requirements? What are the roles and responsibilities of state agencies, third-party plan review and inspection agencies? And what's the quality assurance requirement for the factory to assure that what is coming out is actually meeting the requirements? And then ICC MBI Standard 1210 dives a little bit deeper into mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, energy efficiency, and water conservation opportunities within the factory setting itself. So thinking about sort of that degree of quality or that degree of enhanced finish in the factory, are there opportunities to do some of the testing within the factory itself? And then what are the opportunities for sort of prefabricated MEP systems? So Standard 1210 covers that process. And then most recently, we released Guideline 6, really looking at opportunities to leverage automation, enhanced quality assurance, to really build up the opportunities for panelized systems, really with a focus on sort of a systems-based approach. So how do we get sort of panelized systems really identified more as a component or productized approach, which then really opens up sort of new windows for enhanced opportunities in the offsite construction space. And then I talked about product evaluation, certifications, and listings as an opportunity to get new and innovative products, particularly those that are sort of repetitive or could be commoditized to the market. So we've seen a great interest in picking up the standards, again, to support regulatory consistency. So did want to share a little bit of a brief from the ABC Collaborative or Advanced Building Collaborative, which is supported by the U.S. Department of Energy. Really on a large scale, widespread adoption of the standards effectively reduces the burden of navigating the current patchwork of regional regulations and promotes industry standardization, allowing manufacturers to operate more efficiently and expand their markets. So really pointing again to sort of that importance of regulatory consistency when we're talking about offsite construction that cuts across multiple different jurisdictions. So I mentioned the opportunities that offsite construction provides in the decarbonization space, but there's really sort of more advanced opportunities that we can see to address building impacts sort of across their entire life cycle. And we've got some of those solutions, already in place. We've focused for a long time on the operational energy and water use of buildings. So we have things like the International Energy Conservation Code, International Plumbing Code, International Green Construction Code that really provide requirements, sort of to address operational use. We're starting to see sort of increased focus on the impact of individual products and the construction process itself. Again, through things like the International Green Construction Code, environmental product declarations, which hopefully folks are seeing sort of more of within the building space. And so, we'll continue to see sort of expansion around, those particular opportunities. But as you see, there's still some gaps and opportunities to really identify new processes, new requirements, new procedures that really help us address the entire life cycle of buildings, including the replacement process and end of life. And so I think that's an area where we will continue to see, sort of innovation. And so one way that we've been looking at sort of opportunities to move forward is through the development of a joint standard with ASHRAE. So ASHRAE ICC Standard 240, which really provides a methodology for the quantification of life cycle greenhouse gas emissions across the entire life cycle of buildings. It's really supporting consistency and the ability to sort of have that life cycle vision of where we are in the built environment and where there are opportunities to move forward and address a lot of the challenges and opportunities that we see in this space. And so, I'm not really going to go, sort of too deep in depth into sort of EPDs, but those are certainly one mechanism to understand sort of at a materials or product level, sort of what impact, sort of different material choices have. And so, that's certainly a key part of sort of the ecosystem to address the carbon impact of buildings. And, sort of thinking about sort of building life cycles, it's also important to really understand sort of the nexus of multiple different sort of performance attributes. So, we're not just building a building for its environmental performance. We're building it to stand up in seismic events or wind events. We're looking at sort of occupant health, looking at durability and maintainability and cost. And so really being able to have sort of that full perspective so we can sort of optimize, the building is really important. And then, sort of thinking maybe a little bit deeper on, sort of relative to sort of that holistic approach, how do we start thinking about sort of the interaction of things like energy codes and resilience? So, sort of making the case that energy codes are not just about sort of kilowatt hours, greenhouse gas emissions, BTUs, but really also about sort of the resilience of building occupants. So these graphs actually come out of a report that the U.S. Department of Energy National Labs did, really looking at the passive survivability benefits of energy codes. So really, how long can you stay in a building safely and comfortably after an extreme weather event where you may lose power and you may have either an extreme heat or extreme cold event. So these are sort of examples from Atlanta of sort of models where, existing building, you actually can't really stay that long in a building, before it gets uncomfortable. But, sort of implementing energy codes, most recent energy codes, you reduce or you extend that time by 30%. And then, employing things like passive house standards or similar, you get actually, a 64% benefit on top of that. And so, 3 additional days of safety where folks can be, in their homes. A few more sort of innovative things that are happening, within the code space that, didn't really have time to dive into, but happy to take questions on. Is really the digitalization of building codes and standards. How do we more sort of effectively use building codes in a digital environment, which then leads into sort of conversations on the use of AI in building codes. We've got some sort of tools already out there in the AI space, but sort of thinking about other applications. Use of remote virtual inspections, which really came out of or really expanded, I would say, with COVID. Looking for new strategies to help keep sort of progress going within the buildings industry, but recognizing some of the limitations. And then automated permitting, sort of again in the digital space. How do we use tools to sort of help streamline and accelerate the permitting process? So even sort of further on the horizon, but things that we are sort of currently working on, but maybe don't have super specific solutions in the code space. incorporation of future-focused climate risk. We know that the buildings that we are building today are going to face very different climatic conditions than buildings of the past have. But how do we sort of incorporate that into a codes environment that is very sort of structured, likes to have, sort of its tables and certainty in what the results are. Equity in building codes is another sort of key area. Sort of hand in hand with that is engaging tribal communities in the buildings code space. And then sort of this overall goal, and hopefully sort of you've picked it up through the presentation, is how do we move towards sort of a more holistic approach. So with that, really happy to take some questions, maybe dive into things a little bit more. But again, really appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Ryan, that was amazing. I have many questions, but I'm going to take the first one from John Ingaragiola. And pardon me, John, if I've said your name incorrectly here. This is a technical question. In terms of the relatively low use of the latest resilient building and energy codes, based on adoption statistics, 32% of communities have hazard-resistant codes in place without weakening them. What can this audience do to help the cause for greater adoption of these minimum consensus codes and standards, especially where they live and work?
Really appreciate you joining, and definitely want to give a shout out to FEMA and all the work that you guys do to help support the cause and build safer communities. Yeah, I mean, the statistics are actually, sort of pretty frightening relative to the adoption of codes. As John mentioned, about 30% of communities are not on up-to-date building codes. Maybe even scarier is 30% of the construction that's happening in the U.S. is happening in communities that either don't have a building code or have a code that precedes 2000. So certainly, if we think about, sort of the resilience of those communities, that's certainly a challenge. I think really, from the perspective of this audience, engaging with your local policymakers and your clients, and actually, sort of encouraging the adoption of latest building codes, to support many of the innovations, that I just talked about, providing uniformity, allowing for folks to more easily work in your jurisdiction because they're up to date with the codes, the materials and products that are available, sort of better match with where the updated codes are. And then frankly, for the most part, consumers, or sort of your average home buyer, your average sort of small business owner who's looking to build a building, don't really sort of understand the nuance of codes. There's been some studies that, for the most part, if you ask a person off the street, they think their, state or local government has them covered. They're up to date on building codes. Everything's fine and dandy. But, that's actually, probably not the case. And so, certainly the AEC community, has that ability to sort of speak that language and be that go-between between consumers and local officials. So use your voice and sort of engage in the process at the state and local level. Often AIA chapters, contractor chapters, other sort of local chapters are probably aware of sort of when the opportunities are, but raise your voice, use your voice in that space.
So I'm really intrigued with that notion about people who are part of this innovation community actually using their voice. And so I want to just contrast as you were speaking, thinking about. So I'm based in San Francisco. When you have a hearing about why we need more housing, hundreds and hundreds of people will come and say we need more housing for workforce, for people who are unhoused. I mean, we have this critical need. And I'm just wondering, at a ICC hearing, do you have hundreds of architects and builders and others coming to give testimony and to request new standards, or do these tend to be much smaller affairs?
Yeah, so we get, I guess, over sort of the course of about 2 weeks, probably about 11 to 1400 code change proposals. And there's usually a, proponent and, sort of folks that have opinions on either side of those code change proposals. I will say that, probably the AEC community is underrepresented in that space. Certainly, we hear a lot from manufacturers who probably have an interest. Code officials who are very much sort of engaged in that process. Federal agencies certainly at the table. But I would say sort of the practitioner folks are probably underrepresented in that process, but a valuable voice. I mean, they're ultimately one of the sort of key users of the code. And if the code doesn't work for them or it's not sort of meeting the needs of their clients, then, we've missed sort of that opportunity to optimize those codes. So certainly having more participation at the national level or the model code development level is great, but also, yeah, at the state and local level as well.
Great, thank you. We have a question here from Bill Burke, who used to be the director of San Francisco's Pacific Energy Center. Hi, Bill. Why would the IEC board state regarding residential code updates, and again, this is a quotation, provisions of the code shall not promote or penalize specific types of equipment or fuel resources, end quote. The issue is efficiency and greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And I know there's been sort of a lot of discussion around the International Energy Conservation Code lately, specific to sort of the provision that you mentioned. I showed you the map of sort of where folks are relative to the IBC, very similar sort of map on the IECC, but sort of recognizing that this is a national model code to be used in jurisdictions across the country. Many of those jurisdictions actually have, this is sort of a little bit of a confusing way to say this, but bans on natural gas and fossil fuels. So some places have banned the use of natural gas in new construction. Some places, some states have actually said localities, you cannot ban the use of natural gas. And so, really our focus has been on providing the greatest level of efficiency possible, sort of recognizing, that diversity in sort of how folks use various different fuels. I think the important thing to note, which I mentioned at the very beginning, these codes serve as model codes. So they're actually not any sort of regulatory might until somebody adopts them. And almost exclusively, they're amended at the state and local level. So if a state or a locality has different priorities, we would encourage them to amend the code to meet those specific priorities. And as John eloquently mentioned, these are minimums. So they're meant to be the floor.
Got it. We have a question from Randall Thompson from Nibby Construction. Hi, Randall. Referring back to your slide on how each state handles plan check and permitting of offsite construction, how likely is it that the ICC would adopt a similar policy in order to achieve a more universal adoption of offsite construction practices?
Yeah, so that's really been our work around ICC MBI standards 1200 and 1205 is we brought the committee together of subject matter experts, including folks representing many of those states, to sort of pull together the best practices for regulation of offsite and sort of capture those in those standards. And so now we're working with jurisdictions to get those adopted to hopefully have some of that consistency, that we're really looking for. So I mentioned, Virginia has adopted them. Utah has adopted them. U.S. General Services Administration has adopted them. We actually have a couple other states right now that have made proposals in their regulatory dockets to adopt those standards, including Colorado and Wyoming. So hopefully we get, some regionality there. But we're talking to, probably about 8 or 9 other states who are interested in, adopting those standards. and hopefully getting, some of that consistency that we really need to help support offsite construction advancement.
So you mentioned that the ICC is not a government agency. So how does your funding work? How does that happen?
Yeah, so a few sort of major buckets. We are a membership-based organization, so we have about 60,000 building safety professionals, which include building code officials and code departments, but also architects, engineers, manufacturers, and others that are interested in building safety. I mentioned, personnel training and education. That's certainly a chunk. Product evaluation is another piece. So, working with manufacturers to help get their products to market, software tools, publications. So, sort of a very wide variety of sort of different revenue streams.
Okay, thanks. I'm from that old school of you always have to follow the money when you have a conversation with people. We have a question here from Robert Shepard, who first says, "Wow, this is super interesting. Thank you so much." And I'm going to go to his second question, which is, we find that innovation in buildings and construction is often done at the burden of the applicant, the architect, the builder, the client, with respect to equivalencies or assemblies and other on-standard construction. Where is the ICC at with respect to performance-based codes versus prescriptive?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and something that we're working on, and actually probably should have mentioned. One of our 15 codes is actually the ICC performance code. So really sort of laying out performance-based requirements. I will say that that code has not sort of seen sort of wide uptake in the U.S. But we've sort of recognized, or maybe re-recognized, the value of a performance-based code, and so we're actually going through the process of reimagining the ICC performance code. So we're in that process of actually using a standards-based process to really help sort of folks dive in a little bit more to develop sort of the next iteration of the performance code. So if folks are interested in being involved in that process, we'd certainly love to have you. If you want to just sort of follow along, we should be having a public comment draft available for input at some point in the not too distant future. So we definitely encourage folks to take a look at that and provide feedback. I think the sort of code landscape in the U.S. is interesting. Let's maybe put it that way. I mean, you have sort of two camps. You have sort of folks that are looking for sort of simplified approaches. Just tell me how to do it. I can do it. And that's sort of typically for your residential structures, your sort of small sort of replicable commercial buildings. But if you think about sort of more complex buildings, that doesn't necessarily sort of work. And so how do you sort of create those guardrails but allow for sort of that innovation? And so that's something we're certainly working on through the performance code. And there are certainly opportunities within the product evaluation process as well for more sort of componentized innovative approaches.
That's great. I'm wondering if you could very briefly take us through how someone could approach you with an idea for a product or a process, and how it might go through the processes to be accepted by the ICC. And the reason I ask this is that I know that there are several people on this call who are creators, idea makers of things that could progress how we design and build. So could you just talk through from the idea phase to the approval phase, what that looks like?
Yeah, so a few different avenues, sort of depending on what sort of scale you're thinking about. On the product scale, would put you in touch with folks at the ICC Evaluation Service. Engineers from ICCES would sort of sit down with you and sort of understand, what is your product, what is it trying to achieve? Are there maybe not, sort of exact products, but similar, sort of types of products in the marketplace currently? What would be the requirements, performance requirements, for that type of product? They would work with you to put together the acceptance criteria. So that would be sort of your testing plan. And then, they would sort of, work with you through that process to provide the validation. And ultimately, sort of if everything sort of checks out, they'd, provide the evaluation service report, which then, you can take to code officials, to designers, and say, this product has gone through, a rigorous process. On more sort of conceptual things, sort of new strategies or approaches, I think that's a little bit on a sort of case by case basis. We have a few different levers we can pull. The guideline process is actually sort of pretty flexible for new sort of strategies that, folks sort of maybe have not really seen, but, need to sort of figure out an approach to sort of validate that. So we could work, through a guideline. And then, we have the standards development process, little longer term, but again, sort of opportunity to bring sort of experts to the table to sort of figure out how to deal with, this sort of new approach or strategy. And then, sort of, I think probably longer term is, the code process. The code is intended to be sort of, widely applicable, allow for use of products that are, pretty available in the marketplace. So that's maybe sort of a, longer term strategy, but, there are certainly opportunities for incremental sort of, improvements in the code, sort of as new solutions develop.
That's great. And about how long would it take?
It varies.
Of course,
So,
of course.
yeah, I mean, the product evaluation service process, depending on sort of, where folks are, in their sort of product development, year to 18 months, including the testing time and sort of, all of that, probably about right. The guideline development process, I would probably put it at, a year, maybe a little bit less, depending on sort of, how familiar, sort of folks are with the concept. Standards are probably 18 to 24 months. And then, the codes are updated on a 3-year cycle. But, because it's a sort of very deliberative type process, takes some time for folks to get sort of familiar and comfortable with, new products. It may actually take, sort of a couple iterations to sort of get, everything sort of into the code. But as I mentioned, there are sort of, iterative steps that, folks can take, code cycle to code cycle. And I will say there are, some mechanisms within ICC to help sort of get folks primed maybe for sort of new code change proposals. So we have code action committees. So these are folks that are heavily involved in code development process on a particular topic area. So we have a sustainability, energy, and high performance building code action committee. Those folks sort of get together, share ideas, and make code change proposals sort of as a group. So those are, really the folks to sort of talk to, sort of how do you translate an idea into code language? And certainly if you can, sort of get their buy-in, that's a huge help in, sort of jumpstarting the process.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we're going to have to end our conversation now. Thank you so much to our audience. On a personal note, I'd like to dedicate today's webinar to Lawrence Cornfield, who was the Chief Building Inspector of San Francisco, who in my very first job out of college worked with me to draft a code interpretation to allow live work in commercial buildings, in industrial buildings. That now serves as the model code for live work buildings all throughout the United States. And so, Lawrence, thank you so much for your guidance and direction, and for telling me that you were going to help design this code, but I was going to have to actually do all the research to back it all up. So, so thank you for that, Lawrence. And thank you so much, Ryan, for your time, your attention. This was so illuminating. We're definitely going to have you back. I hope that we can use this conversation to help inspire more innovators to support the work of the ICC and to be a voice for change and for the continuing opportunities of innovation as we go forward. So thank you so much. As I mentioned, this webinar will be placed on the CFI website, so be sure to share the link with your colleagues. And finally, special thanks to the amazing Katie Olson, who makes all the magic happen with all of our social media and webinars. Thanks so much, Ryan. Can't wait to have you back again soon.
Thank you.